point between, if I remember it correctly, between Godard and Claude Lanzmann. Godard said he would have used these shots. Claude Lanzmann, precisely the author of Shoah, said no. If he were to stumble upon such movies, he would have immediately burned them. This is also what makes it so unbearable to witness the last moments of people who know they are shortly going to die and are in this sense already living dead. Again, imagine that we would have discovered among the ruins of the Twin Towers a video camera which somehow survived the crash intact and is full of shots of what went on among the passengers of one of the planes just in those last minutes before they crashed into one of the towers. In all these cases, it is that effectively we would have seen things, as it were, as they are in themselves, outside human coordinates, outside our human reality. Incidentally, my fantasy is that maybe the US authorities have these shots and don't want to show them or whatever. But now, again, my claim is that it is at this level that we should locate the anti-Semitic fantasies. They're precisely providing, of course, within the anti-Semitic ideological space, an insight into this impossible otherness. Why? One of the supreme ironies of the history of anti-Semitism is that Jews can stand, of course, within the anti-Semitic space, for both poles of an opposition. They are stigmatized as upper class, rich merchants exploiting us, and low class, filthy. They are perceived as too intellectual, you know, just working all the time, reading books, and too earthly, sexual predators, and so on, as lazy and workaholics. Sometimes they stand for the stubborn attachment to their particular life form, which prevents them from becoming full citizens of the state they live in. Sometimes they stand for a homeless, uprooted, universal cosmopolitanism, indifferent towards all particular life forms. The focus changes with different historical epochs. In the era of the French Revolution, the Jews were sometimes, for example, by the great partisan of the French Revolution among the German idealists, Fichte, they were condemned as too particularist. The reproach was they continued to stick to their identity, rejecting to become abstract citizens of a state like everyone else. In the late 19th century, with the rise of imperialist patriotism, the accusation was turned around. Jews are no longer perceived as too particular, but on the contrary as too cosmopolitan, ruthless, lacking the proper place. The key change in the history of Western anti-Semitism paradoxically occurred with the political emancipation of the Jews, the granting of civil rights to the Jews, which followed the French Revolution. In the early modernity, the pressure on the Jews was to convert to Christianity. And the problem was, can one trust them? You know, from Shakespeare, Merchant of Venice, and so on. It's always this problem. First, let's force them to convert to Christianity, and then, but did they really become Christians, or do they secretly continue to practice their rituals? However, in the later 19th century, a shift occurs which culminates in the Nazi anti-Semitism. Conversion is now out of the question, meaningless. Did you notice this difference? How all of a sudden, after the French Revolution, it's no longer the question of converting the Jews. Hitler never was thinking in these terms, let's convert them. Why? For the Nazis, the guilt of the Jews is directly rooted in their biological constitution. One does not have to prove that they are guilty. They are guilty already by being Jews. Why? The key is provided, I think, by the sudden rise in the Western ideological imaginary of the figure of the wandering eternal Jew in the age of Romanticism. That is to say, precisely when in real life, with the explosion of capitalism, features attributed to Jews expanded into the whole of society. Since commodity exchange became hegemonic. It was thus at the very moment when Jews were deprived of their specific properties, which made it easy to distinguish them from the rest of the population, and when the Jewish question was resolved at the political level by the formal emancipation of the Jews, that is to say, by granting Jews the same rights as to all other normal Christian citizens, that their curse was inscribed into their very being. They were no longer ridiculous misers and so on, but demoniac heroes of eternal damnation, haunted by an unspecified, unspeakable guilt, condemned to wander around, longing to find redemption in death. So it was precisely when the specific figure of the Jew disappeared that the absolute Jew emerged. And this transformation conditioned the shift of anti-Semitism from theology to race. Their damnation was their race. They were not guilty for what they did: exploit the Christian, murder their children, rape their women, or ultimately betray and murder Jesus Christ, but for what they were. And of course, it is this shift which laid the foundations for the Holocaust, for the physical annihilation of the Jews as the only appropriate final solution of their so-called problem. Insofar as Jews were specified by a series of their properties, the goal was to convert them, to turn them into Christians. But from the moment that Jewishness began to concern their very being, only annihilation can solve the so-called Jewish question. However, the true mystery of anti-Semitism is why is it such a constant? Why does it persist through all historical mutations? Things are a little bit as with what Marx says about Homer. The true mystery to explain is not the origins, how Homer's poetry is rooted in early Greek society, but why does it persist to exert its artistic charm till today, long after the social conditions that gave birth to it disappeared? It is easy to date, to determine the original moment of European anti-Semitism. It all started, I claim, not in the ancient Rome, but in the 11th, 12th century Europe, which was awakening from the inertia of the so-called Dark Ages and experienced a fast growth of market exchange and the role of money. At that precise point, the Jew emerged as the enemy, the usurper, the parasitic intruder who disturbs the harmonious social edifice. Incidentally, theologically, this moment is also the moment of what Jacques Le Goff called the birth of the purgatorium. The idea that the choice is not only between heaven and hell. There has to be a third mediating place where one can, as it were, make a deal, pay for one's sins, if they are not too great, with a determined amount of repentance, money, economy again. So where are we today? I claim we are witnessing the last version of anti-Semitism, which, as I am tempted to say as a Hegelian, reached the extreme point of self-relating. That is to say, the privileged role of Jews in the establishment of the sphere of what Kant calls public use of reason hinges on their subtraction from state power. This position of the, to use Jacques Ranciere's term, part of no part of every organic nation-state community, this, not the abstract universal nature of their monotheism, makes them one of the figures of the immediate embodiment of universality. No wonder then that with the establishment of the Jewish nation-state in 48, 49, a new figure of the Jew emerged, a Jew resisting identification with the state of Israel, refusing to accept the state of Israel as his or her true home, a Jew who subtracts himself also from his own state, a Jew who includes the state of Israel among the states towards which he or she insists on maintaining a distance.